My sister-in-law tried to erase me from family holidays with petty power plays, so I showed up confident, stole the spotlight, and quietly exposed her. I'm a 31-year-old woman, and for as long as I can remember, Thanksgiving has always been a formal affair at my brother's house. I'm talking long dining tables, gold-trimmed plates, tiny handwritten place cards, and those decorative gourds that no one touches. It's the kind of dinner where you wear shoes that hurt just to look the part, even if you're sitting on a folding chair for 3 hours. My brother Adam is 2 years older than me. Growing up, we were close in that weird sibling way. You fight like wild animals over the remote, then split a bag of chips 10 minutes later like nothing happened. He's the quieter, logical type, always doing things by the book. I've always been the opposite, sarcastic, artsy, and a bit too honest for some people's taste. Even with our differences, we got along. At least, we used to, before his wife came into the picture. I met his now wife Amelia 6 years ago at one of those backyard family gatherings with too many folding chairs and not enough ice. She was polite but stiff, the kind who smiles with her teeth but not her eyes. I thought maybe she was just shy or overwhelmed meeting so many of us. But the longer she stuck around, the clearer it became she just didn't like me. It wasn't one big thing, it was years of little digs. She'd ask what I was working on these days with a tone that made freelance graphic designer sound like I said I drew stick figures for a living. She once told me my apartment had a cozy charm that made it ideal for a starter space, which was her way of saying small. One year I wore a burnt orange dress to dinner, and she said it reminded her of pumpkin soup, the passive-aggressive stuff. She's practically fluent in it. I've been left off group texts more times than I can count. I'll get family invitations hours or even days after everyone else. She once organized a family secret Santa and somehow forgot to assign me to anyone, and no one drew my name either. Even in photo collages she makes for my parents, I'm mysteriously missing from half of them. Whenever I bring it up, my brother just mumbles something about how I must be reading into things. My parents always urge me to keep the peace and not ruin the holidays with drama. So, I've let it slide over and over, always the one rolling my eyes in silence while she sips wine and makes backhanded comments under the guise of just teasing. This year, the Thanksgiving invite came as a group text, again sent by her. She said to arrive at 3 p.m. for light bites before dinner. I showed up at 2:30, figuring I'd help set the table or at least not be late. I walked in and immediately realized something was off. Everyone was already seated, their plates half empty. Some people were on their second glasses of wine. The turkey was almost gone. The mashed potatoes were just the crusty leftovers around the rim of the bowl. I stood there, stunned, coat still on, and looked around for my name card. Nothing. Every seat had a place card, neatly printed with little leafy borders, except one. I asked if I was missing something, and Amelia widened her eyes like she'd just realized a crime had been committed. "Oh no," she said. "Must have been a printer error." She pointed me to a folding chair at the end with no placemat, no napkin, not even a fork. Then she handed me a plate with one lonely slice of pie on it, clearly meant as an insult, not dessert. "Well, at least you won't have to worry about calories," she said. "Next time, try being on time." I reminded her I was early. She smiled, tilted her head, and moved on. My brother sat quietly beside her, cutting his turkey into tiny pieces like the plate in front of him was his only concern in life. My parents didn't say a word. Everyone else looked anywhere but at me. Later, during dessert, she turned the conversation toward careers. "So," she asked, "still doing the art thing?" I nodded. She nodded back like she was humoring me. Then she launched into a story about her sister landing a marketing position with a 6-figure salary and a company car. I decided to leave after that. As I stood up, she raised her glass and gave a toast to people who follow through in life. A couple of people chuckled. I didn't wait to see who. I walked out while the room was still full. Nobody followed, nobody called. I cried in the car. It felt pathetic. But it wasn't just about that night. It was every time she'd chipped away at me while everyone else let her. 2 days later, I got a formal Christmas invitation. Same gold foil border, same font, same house, no mention of what happened. Just a cheerful note at the bottom, festive attire encouraged. This time, I didn't plan on going alone. I texted Leo, an old friend from childhood. He was in town for the holidays, and I knew he wouldn't hesitate. What Amelia didn't know, couldn't have known, was who Leo was now, and that made all the difference. Mason and I first met in sophomore year of high school. He was the new kid with a buzz cut and a notebook full of recipes, and I was the girl who doodled over every corner of her textbooks. We stayed close all through senior year, then drifted when college took us in different directions. We reconnected last year after I commented on a cooking video he posted. He messaged me that same night. Since then, we'd kept in touch off and on, mostly through memes and voice notes. When I texted him about Christmas, I didn't expect him to say yes so quickly. I asked if he'd be willing to join me for a slightly petty holiday stunt. His exact words were, "Only if I get to wear something ridiculous." Mason isn't just some random guy from my past anymore. He's a professional chef, runs a mid-sized YouTube channel, and just released his second cookbook. He does monthly food segments on local TV, and has this very curated, effortlessly charming energy about him that somehow works without being obnoxious. He keeps his fame low-key, but the moment he walks into a room, people usually clock that he's someone. We planned everything down to the details, matching wine-colored outfits chosen to look effortless, but just coordinated enough to make her wonder if it was a statement. We added school color pins from our high school days, tucked just under our lapels. It was personal, but just bold enough that someone would definitely ask about it. We agreed to play the couple card just enough to make people wonder, holding hands here and there, inside jokes only we understood, and a level of comfort that only old friends can pull off. We arrived at exactly 6 p.m. Amelia opened the door herself. Her smile was instant, practiced, and just a second too late. She stared at Mason like she was trying to do a background check using only her eyes. He gave her a charming nod, handed over a bottle of spiced pear wine, and complimented the wreath on the door. She didn't know what to do with it. She asked how we knew each other. I jumped in saying, "Mason and I go way back, high school theater and late-night diner trips." Mason added, "She makes the best coffee I've ever had, and I've had coffee in Paris." That line earned a raised eyebrow from her and a stifled laugh from my cousin standing in the foyer. We walked into the dining room, and that's when I noticed it, my name card. Not only was it actually there this time, but it was placed at the head of the table, opposite Amelia's. Mason's was beside mine. Amelia commented that it must have been Adam's doing, then quickly excused herself to the kitchen. My brother came over a few minutes later and casually said, "Good to see you," like nothing had happened at Thanksgiving. The room was already buzzing, but once people realized who Mason was, it turned into something else. My younger cousins recognized him from a baking challenge he judged online. One asked for a selfie. Amelia passed by during that moment and very conveniently didn't react. She didn't say anything, just clutched her glass a little tighter. Dinner started with butternut squash soup and a round of introductions. Mason had everyone laughing with a story about getting locked inside a spice market in Morocco. When he mentioned, "We once got lost in New Orleans and ended up eating gumbo with a jazz band in someone's backyard," my aunt laughed so hard she had to dab her eyes. Amelia kept trying to change the topic to her boss's Christmas party at a vineyard or her sister's private yoga retreat, but nobody really bit. The main course came out, and it was fine. Mason complimented the roast politely, commented on the plating, and even offered to help clear plates. Then came dessert, Amelia's pride and joy. She'd made a fig and almond tart, and she introduced it like it was a finalist in a food competition. Mason took a bite, chewed slowly, then smiled and said, "Interesting crust choice." That one line was enough to shift the entire atmosphere. No insult, no sarcasm, just a quiet observation that made everyone look down at their own slice with new eyes. My mom leaned over and whispered that Mason seemed like a lovely man. My dad poured him another glass of wine without being asked. Even Adam cracked a smile at one of Mason's stories about competing in a chili cook-off and accidentally setting fire to his own tablecloth. Amelia kept smiling, but her eyes didn't match. By the time we finished eating, Mason was the unofficial star of the evening. When we stood to leave, Amelia offered a strained goodbye and didn't ask where we were headed next. Mason waited until we got in the car, then let out a quiet whistle. "That was intense," he said. "I've been to award dinners that were less awkward. What's her deal with you?" I laughed once and told him, "I'm still figuring that out." He nodded. "Well, whatever it is, I think tonight made an impression." It did. The silence from Amelia's end afterwards said more than any speech could. After dinner on Christmas night, just as people started collecting coats and leftovers, my sister-in-law called everyone into the living room for a group photo. It was her usual thing, one of those traditions she started the first year she married my brother. She had a tripod already set up and was giving directions like a wedding planner. Mason slid beside me, rested his arm casually over my shoulder, and smiled straight at the camera. She stood on the far side of the group, her face tight like she was trying to smile through a mouthful of lemon. 2 days later, I printed out one of the photos, just one where Mason and I were laughing together with my parents in the background, and had it framed. It wasn't for any dramatic reason, I just thought it was a good picture. I gave it to my parents as a small thank you for always hosting and dealing with the chaos. They placed it right on the mantel between a wedding photo of my cousin and a vacation shot from 2 summers ago. A week passed. Then came my sister-in-law's next visit to my parents' house. She walked in with a bag of Tupperware and her usual air of importance, dropped off something for my mom, and spotted the frame. She paused, tilted her head, and didn't say a word. I just looked at it, blinked once, and moved on. My mom and I exchanged a glance but didn't say anything either. The next family gathering was my cousin's birthday brunch. Nothing formal, just coffee, breakfast casseroles, and too many people crammed into one living room. Mason didn't come, but a few of my younger cousins asked if he'd be there. One of them even mentioned a risotto recipe from his website they tried making. It wasn't a big conversation, but I noticed it. The casual way they talked about him like he'd always been around. My sister-in-law didn't comment. Then came her version of a power move. A week after that brunch, she surprised everyone with New Year's gifts. Framed family photos from Christmas. Everyone got one. Mine was different. While most had the big group photo with all 12 of us, mine was a smaller picture of just my parents, my brother, and her. Mason and I weren't in it at all. My mom unwrapped hers beside me and frowned. Hers had the full group. She looked over at mine, looked at me, then asked out loud why mine was cropped. My sister-in-law gave a breezy answer about trying to match everyone's aesthetic. No one responded. The next morning, my brother sent me a short text. She felt overshadowed. "You kind of stole the show." I showed Mason the message later that afternoon. He rolled his eyes, laughed, and said, "Want me to cook something for New Year's if your folks are doing anything?" I said I'd ask, not expecting anything to come of it. To my surprise, my mom actually loved the idea. She said she was tired of stiff dinners and wanted something simple for once. We set up a potluck-style lunch for New Year's Day, with everyone asked to bring something. My mom specifically requested Mason's seafood risotto, the one she saw on a local segment of his. He agreed instantly. A group message went out with the invite. Everyone replied within a couple of hours. My sister-in-law responded last, hours after everyone else, with just a thumbs-up emoji. On New Year's Day, Mason showed up with 2 trays of risotto, fresh bread, and a citrus salad he threw together last minute. The whole kitchen smelled like it belonged in a restaurant. Everyone else brought casseroles, cookies, and pasta salad. Classic family stuff. But people zeroed in on Mason's dishes instantly. My uncle tried the risotto and asked where Mason bought it from. When I told him it was homemade, he stared at Mason for a few seconds, then asked for the recipe. My cousin said it was better than anything she'd had at her anniversary dinner downtown. My dad went back for thirds. My sister-in-law arrived late, carrying a plastic container of cupcakes from a grocery store. She said her oven broke that morning. The price tag was still stuck to the bottom of the container. No one touched them. She tried to joke about celebrity chefs being too fancy for the rest of us. The room went quiet. One cousin coughed. That was it. At one point, my brother lingered near Mason, then quietly asked how he gets his steak so tender, like he was trying to detach himself from her without making a scene. I watched from the hallway as Mason leaned in and gave him advice like they were old friends. After lunch, my mom found me in the kitchen while I was rinsing dishes. She asked me, in a low voice, if something more serious had been going on between me and Amelia. I told her everything. Every slight, every skipped message, every missing name tag. She didn't interrupt. She just listened and nodded once when I finished. That night, before Mason left, my dad walked him to his car and shook his hand. Then he turned to me and said, "You looked confident again today. We've missed that." That was the first time in years I saw my parents look at me like that, like they remembered who I used to be before Amelia started trying to rewrite me. The Sunday after New Year's, we were all at my parents' place for a regular brunch. Nothing fancy, just coffee, eggs, and whatever pastries my dad had picked up that morning. My brother was there, mostly quiet, scrolling through his phone. My mom was talking about recipes she wanted to try, and somewhere between bites of banana bread, she mentioned Mason's name. She said his food reminded her of something she once had at a restaurant in Italy and added that he had a calming presence. My brother didn't say much, just nodded. My dad added that Mason seemed to balance the room. Coming from him, that was more than a compliment. It was a sign. 2 days later, my sister-in-law sent a group message to everyone in the family chat. The subject was Easter. She said she wanted to go back to tradition this year and keep things simple. Just family. It was worded like a gentle request, but anyone paying attention could tell it wasn't random. It was clearly aimed at me and at Mason. She even added that it would be a family-only dinner and asked everyone to respect the tone of the gathering. That same night, my dad asked in the chat if family only meant that long-term partners were included. She quickly replied, yes, of course, but didn't clarify further. She didn't mention Mason at all. The conversation ended there, but the silence afterwards said more than the messages. The next day, my brother called me. He said his wife was still adjusting to how things had changed lately and felt like family events were getting too showy. He asked me if I'd be willing to not escalate things and maybe skip bringing Mason to Easter. I told him I'd think about it. He didn't push further. Later that evening, I told my parents about the call. For the first time, neither of them told me to be the bigger person. My mom said, "You're not causing drama. She just doesn't like the attention offer." My dad nodded and said if I decided not to attend, they'd understand, but they hoped I wouldn't let her dictate who I could or couldn't bring. When I told Mason, he laughed. He said, "You want me to crash it? I'll wear pastels and bring deviled eggs." I told him I appreciated the offer, but we both knew the goal wasn't to cause a scene. We agreed he wouldn't come to Easter, but we'd do something together after dinner. I wanted to show her I wasn't rattled, and I wasn't excluded, just choosing where to put my energy. On Easter, I showed up on time with a small gift for my grandmother, a photo album with a few old scanned pictures she hadn't seen in years. My sister-in-law opened the door, gave me a tight smile, and turned away before I'd even stepped inside. My parents greeted me normally. My cousin's kids ran over like always. Most people acted like nothing was wrong, but there was a weird energy around the table. During dinner, my sister-in-law kept steering the conversation toward a new business she and her sister were planning, a catering startup. She talked about branding, logistics, and a fresh take on elevated finger foods. Nobody seemed to know what she was talking about. Her sister looked confused. The whole time after dessert, her sister came over to where I was sitting in the sunroom and told me quietly that the catering idea had only come up once during a wine night, and they'd never actually planned anything. She didn't seem annoyed, just puzzled about why it had come up like a real thing. At one point, while passing me the bread basket, my sister-in-law casually mentioned how tough it must be relying on freelance work. She said something about how real stability matters in the long term. I didn't respond. I just thanked her for the bread and moved on. Toward the end of the evening, my cousin's daughter came over with a drawing she'd made of the Easter lunch. It had all of us sitting around the table, including Mason. She'd drawn him beside me with a big smile and a chef's hat. My sister-in-law saw it. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't say anything. The ride home was quiet, but it was clear something had shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one trying to keep peace while being sidelined. Her grip on the family narrative was loosening. Not because I made a scene, not because of anything loud, just in all the quiet cracks that had started to show. A week after Easter, I got a text from my brother asking if I was free for coffee. No emojis, no group message, just him reaching out directly. That hadn't happened in over a year. We picked a neutral spot, a small cafe downtown near the bookstore we used to visit as kids. I got there early. He was already inside, sitting by the window, spinning a spoon in his cup and bouncing his knee like it was on a timer. He looked more tired than usual, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Dark circles under his eyes, distracted glances at the door, the kind of expression someone has when they've been holding in a truth too long. After a bit of small talk, he leaned forward and said the holidays had been harder than he expected. "You showing up with Mason," he started, "it made things complicated." He clarified right away that he wasn't blaming me. He said seeing Mason there, welcomed, calm, fun, and supported, made him realize how different things had become in his own house. He said the word performative. That's how he described her. He said she had turned their home into a stage. Every holiday, every gathering, every post-dinner toast wasn't just for the family. It was for the image of being the perfect host, perfect wife, perfect centerpiece of the family. For the first time, it had started to wear him down. He admitted he hadn't even known that I was given the wrong time for Thanksgiving. He said Amelia told him I was busy and didn't want to come early, that I had work deadlines, and that's why he didn't question anything. Then he told me something else. Apparently, she had access to his phone and would open and delete my messages before he saw them. He only found out when she accidentally left one half open and forgot to clear it. He noticed a pattern and started checking more carefully. There were texts I sent that he never saw, ones about family plans, asking for addresses, even checking in. I asked him how long it had been going on, and he said he didn't know for sure, but it had been a while. He told me he'd been trying to keep the peace, that every time he brought something up, she'd shut down completely or threaten to leave. He didn't say it directly, but it was clear he had been managing a marriage that operated on control, not communication. I told him I didn't need him to pick sides. I just needed him to stop pretending she was blameless when things were clearly not okay. I told him enabling her behavior was hurting more than just me. He nodded and said he'd noticed things more often lately. The way she rewrote stories after they happened. The way she hosted gatherings that felt more like branding campaigns. He said he wanted to be more present going forward. No more blind spots, he promised. We didn't fix everything in that one conversation, but it felt like the beginning of something different. That same night, I got another message from her. This time she invited me to a summer barbecue she was hosting at a local vineyard she'd rented out for the day. The message was long and oddly formal, like it had been run through an approval process. There were phrases like cherishing family moments and an atmosphere of unity and renewal. It didn't sound like something she'd actually say. It read like a script. Something about it felt off. When I told Mason, he didn't even hesitate. "Stop worrying," he said. "She's regrouping, trying to flip the narrative. Redemption arc in public. Let her do it. Just don't hand her the script." He couldn't make it to the barbecue. He had a shoot that weekend for a campaign collaboration. I told him it was fine. I didn't need backup this time. This wasn't about Mason anymore. It was about how I chose to walk in. I picked a bold dress for the day, sunflower yellow with a deep neckline and flared sleeves. Not flashy, just confident. I arrived on time. The vineyard setup looked like it was pulled straight from a wedding blog. Floral arches, cheese boards shaped like animals, linen tablecloths, printed menus, and a DJ softly mixing jazz in the background. She'd invited some unfamiliar faces, work friends, her boss, a couple from her gym. It wasn't just a barbecue, it was a show. Right after the welcome drinks, she stood in front of the main table and gave a little speech. She held her wine glass up and said she wanted to toast to forgiveness, fresh starts, and family harmony. Then she looked straight at me, held the stare for a moment too long, and smiled. I didn't raise my glass. I didn't frown either. I just nodded slightly. She was building towards something. That much was clear, but whatever it was going to happen in front of an audience, and she wanted control of the narrative again. This time, I was ready for it. The moment I stepped onto the vineyard lawn for the barbecue, it was clear the guest list wasn't just family. There were a handful of co-workers I'd never seen before, a couple from her gym, some neighbors from their gated community, and even her old college roommate, who I overheard had been flown in for the weekend, as part of Amelia's perfect host fantasy. It wasn't a gathering, it was a production. She was in full performance mode, gliding from group to group with air kisses, compliments, and exaggerated laughs that felt rehearsed. She introduced me to one of her co-workers with a sugary smile, calling me our family artist, and then added, "She's still figuring out her business path." It was loud enough for the small circle around us to hear, and she moved on before I could respond. A few minutes later, while standing near the drink table, she circled back and asked casually, but loud enough to catch ears, "Are you still doing the food thing with that guy from Christmas?" I didn't flinch. I smiled and answered, "Yes, we're collaborating on a book. Actually, you'll see it in stores next spring." Which was true. Mason and I had started sketching out a cookbook and design series focused on accessible recipes with artistic layouts. It wasn't some daydream, we were already in talks with a publisher. She blinked, gave a short laugh, and said, "Well, I guess anything is possible these days." Then she turned back to the grill station like nothing happened. Her boss, standing nearby, had caught the exchange and leaned in to ask more about the book. I gave him a short pitch, concept, target readers, initial artwork plans. He seemed interested and told me he loved the idea of pairing visuals with simple cooking. Half an hour in, one of the kids from the extended group knocked over a cup of bright red juice directly onto the elaborate cheese sculpture she had placed on the center table. Chaos broke out, napkins flying, gasps, whispers. She immediately snapped at one of the staffers about placement and then loudly blamed the venue for poor table design. Her face tightened, and she spent the next few minutes trying to reposition things while everyone awkwardly milled around, pretending not to notice. As I helped move one of the serving trays out of the way, her college roommate came up beside me and whispered, "She hasn't changed, has she?" That one line, quiet and without malice, spoke volumes. I didn't need to respond. The tone said everything. Later, my brother tried to adjust one of the flower arrangements after the spill. When she barked at him about the symmetry being off, he just looked at her, raised his eyebrows, and walked away. No snappy response, no argument, just disengagement. That's when I knew something was cracking. He found me near the vineyard's edge about 20 minutes later, just us, the breeze, and a tray of untouched mini quiches. He stood next to me for a while, then said, "I'm not blind anymore. I'm sorry it took this long." Then he walked back inside without waiting for an answer. As the evening wrapped up, she gathered everyone near the back patio for what she called a little thank you gift exchange. She had custom bags made with everyone's names and gold foil tied with satin ribbon, except mine. Mine was a plain paper bag with no name tag, and inside was a cheap keychain shaped like a wine glass. Unwrapped, Everyone else's had personalized candles and vineyard gift cards. It didn't go unnoticed. My cousin, sitting next to me, looked into her own bag, pulled out a wrapped candle, and quietly traded it with mine under the table while locking eyes with me. No words, just a small, silent move of solidarity. That small act meant more than anything she could have said out loud. On the way out, my mom stopped beside me at the car and said, "The whole thing felt very curated, don't you think?" Then she adjusted her purse strap and walked off before I could respond. 3 days later, I was back in my apartment working on page layouts for the cookbook when a message popped up from my sister-in-law, "We should talk. Coffee next week." And just like that, the next chapter began. We met at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. All glass walls, bright light, safe and very public, exactly the kind of place someone picks when they want to avoid scenes. She had already claimed a window seat by the time I arrived, sipping something iced through a straw and scrolling her phone. Her expression lifted as soon as she spotted me, all polished and perfectly rehearsed. She stood, gave me a hug that felt like a photo opportunity, thanked me for coming, and said she wanted to clear the air. I didn't interrupt. I just let her go on. She started with what sounded like an apology, but it was wrapped in padding. She mentioned the stress of planning events and how people can feel overlooked when that's never the intention. No actual acknowledgement of Thanksgiving, no mention of the missing place card, no responsibility, just enough smooth language to sound polite while dodging the point. Then came the real reason for the meeting. She leaned forward, lowered her voice, and asked if I would consider being a little less out there during family events. Her words, "It's hard for some people to shine when others are always on stage." She didn't say Mason's name. She didn't bring up Easter, but the message was clear. I asked her plainly, "Is your issue with me, or is it with how other people respond to me?" She didn't answer. She smiled like she hadn't heard the question, took another sip of her drink and looked away. That pause told me everything I needed. I told her I wasn't going to shrink myself to make her feel bigger. I said I wasn't doing anything outrageous, just showing up, being present, and not hiding anymore. I reminded her that I'd never gone out of my way to humiliate her. All I'd done was stop letting her exclude me quietly. That was what shook her. She blinked twice, and the smile slipped for the first time. She leaned back, arms crossed. "So, that's how it is," she said. I nodded. "That's how it's been," I replied. Then came the thinly veiled warning. She told me I was making things harder for my brother, that he was caught in the middle and didn't deserve to be dragged into some power struggle. I told her my brother was a grown man who could speak for himself, and that she was the one setting up sides, not me. I had just stopped playing along with her script. The meeting ended with her standing to hug me again, this time colder. She said, "Let's try to be civil for the family." I told her I've always been civil. You're just not used to being told no. That evening my brother called. He said she told him I'd been aggressive and tried to stir things up. I told him exactly what was said, word for word. He didn't argue. He didn't even sound surprised. He just said, "Yeah, that sounds more like you." We left it at that. A few weeks later, my parents invited a small group over for dinner. Just my brother, me, and a couple of cousins. My sister-in-law didn't come. He told us she had other plans. No one asked for details. No one even looked shocked. At a different get-together later that month, her younger sister came to help with cleanup after dessert. She didn't say much, just dried a few plates beside me, then said quietly, "She doesn't like not being the center." She patted my arm and walked away. Mason stopped by a few days later with an early copy of his cookbook. Inside the front cover, he'd scribbled a note above his signature, "For the ones who stopped shrinking." It made me laugh harder than anything had in weeks. For my birthday, I kept things small, dinner at a rooftop bistro with friends, my parents, and my brother. Mason came too. My sister-in-law wasn't invited. She saw the photos. They were posted by someone else, not me. She never said a word. I didn't get revenge. That was never the goal. What I got instead was clarity. She didn't change, but the story she'd built around herself started to collapse without me even touching it. People began noticing the patterns for themselves. I didn't have to force a confrontation. I just stopped apologizing for existing. She exposed herself.